So I made this video last October criticizing NASCAR for the rules and enforcement on track limits, specifically in regards to the 2020 Fall Talladega race, but racing at Daytona and Talladega in general. And I said this: pretty much every racing series in the world has track limits, and that includes NASCAR. But these other series have pretty much figured it out for the most part. If you leave the track, you get a penalty. And now, I still stand behind this, because I said for the most part. But this falls into the not so most part. F1's track limits rules are usually pretty clear, maybe not popular, but usually clear. But there was some controversy in Bahrain over track limits, and so we're going to talk about that. And so, I said F1's track limits were clear but not popular, and here's an example. Nobody likes the track limits rule at Turn 2 in Sochi. But Turn 2 at Sochi just kind of sucks, but then again, some will say that about the track in general, but that's not the point. That's a whole nother video. The point is, the rule isn't popular, but it's clear. If you leave the track, you get a penalty. If you don't go to the left of the sign. The rule from the 2020 Russian Grand Prix specifically reads, quote, each time any car fails to negotiate turn 2 by using the track, and who passes to the left of or has any part of the car over the first orange curb element prior to the apex or to the left of the orange apex sausage at turn 2 must then rejoin the track by driving around the array of blocks as indicated by the arrows before the rejoin of the track at turn 3. End quote. So they defined what missing turn 2 is, and they defined what to do if you miss the corner to not incur a penalty. But there's two things at play here when we're talking about track limits. First, the Formula One sporting regulations, specifically Article 27.3. Quote, drivers must make every reasonable effort to use the track at all times and may not leave the track without a justifiable reason. Drivers will be judged to have left the track if no part of the car remains in contact with it, and for the avoidance of doubt, any white lines defining the track edges are considered to be part of the track, but the curbs are not. Should a car leave the track, the driver may rejoin. However, this may only be done when it is safe to do so without gaining any lasting advantage. At the absolute discretion of the race director, a driver may be given the opportunity to give back the whole of any advantage he gained by leaving the track. End quote. So this rule defines general aspects of track limits for Formula One drivers to follow, but there's a second part to these rules, and that falls within the race director's notes. The above rule from Sochi falls within the race director's notes. The race director's notes are issued before every Grand Prix and outline specific things relevant to each specific track. So now, on to the controversy. At the beginning of the weekend, FIA race director Michael Massey said that track limits would not be monitored at turn 4 in regard to setting a lap time, with section 21 of the race director's notes stating, quote, 21.1. The track limits at the exit of turn 4 will not be monitored with regard to setting a lap time, as the defining limits are the artificial grass and the gravel trap in that location. 21.2. In all cases during the race, drivers are reminded of the provisions of Article 27.3 of the sporting regulations. End quote. But that wasn't the end of it. On Friday, Michael Massey released an updated version of his event notes with section 21 now stating, quote, 21.1. Practice sessions. A lap time achieved during any practice session by leaving the track and cutting behind the red and white curb on the exit of turn 4 will result in that lap time being invalidated by the stewards. 21.2 Race, subsection A. The track limits at the exit of turn 4 will not be monitored with regard to setting a lap time, as the defining limits are the artificial grass and the gravel trap in that location. Subsection B. In all cases during the race, drivers are reminded of the provisions of Article 27.3 of the sporting regulations. End quote. Okay, so to recap, we've gone from we don't care if you run wide at turn 4 to now we care if you run wide in practice and qualifying, but not the race. Go crazy. And for clarification, the rule only outlines practicing the race, but qualifying is officially classified by the FIA as practice. We go into the race, and the FIA was allowing cars to run wide. In fact, Hamilton ran wide 29 times, or 50.88% of the race. Red Bull told Max Verstappen that Hamilton was running wide out of turn 4, and then instructed Verstappen to do the same thing to minimize the time loss to Hamilton through that corner. The FIA then issued a warning about running wide at turn 4 on lap 32. Mercedes told Hamilton to stop running wide, and that the next time he ran wide he would get the black and white flag, and then the next time after that he would get a 5-second penalty. Pretty standard. Hamilton continued running wide for the next 4 laps, and Mercedes again warned Hamilton, and then Hamilton stopped running wide on lap 36. Later in the race, Verstappen overtook Hamilton at turn 4 by running wide off the track, and Red Bull was issued a suggestion by Michael Masi to give the spot back, as it potentially violated Article 27.3 of the sporting regulations, and could be subject to a penalty from the stewards. Again, to recap, Article 27.3. Quote, drivers must make every reasonable effort to use the track at all times, and may not leave the track without a justifiable reason. Drivers will be judged to have left the track if no part of the car remains in contact with it, and for the avoidance of doubt, any white lines defining the track edges are considered to be part of the track, but the curbs are not. Should a car leave the track, the driver may rejoin, however this may only be done when it is safe to do so, and without gaining any lasting advantage. At the absolute discretion of the race director, a driver may be given the opportunity to give back the whole of any advantage he gained by leaving the track. End quote. So you may ask, why even run wide out of the corner? Well, by running wide, it widens out the corner, making it faster. So by running wide, you make up time over staying on the track. So I have 2 issues with how this played out. 1, the rule is changed from we don't care to we care in practice and qualifying, but not the race. But then mid-race the rule is changed again, and they said we do care, stop running wide, even though we said track limits won't be monitored. Michael Masi said Verstappen overtaking Hamilton off track gave him a lasting advantage. I can see why he would say that, and I agree. But by that same logic, Hamilton gained a lasting advantage the 29 times he ran wide, because his time through that corner would have been faster than cars that took the corner properly by staying on the track, having felt that's what they were supposed to do. I think, and this is my opinion and interpretation, but I think the rule was intended as more of a, hey, we're not going to delete your lap time if you, say, make a mistake and run a little wide once or twice. I don't think the rule was ever meant to say just go crazy, though, because in the race director's notes, it reminded drivers of 27.3 of the sporting regulations, which requires drivers to make every reasonable effort to use the track. However, I don't think my interpretation is how it was interpreted by all the teams and drivers, like Mercedes and Hamilton. Hamilton thought he could run wide every lap, whereas Verstappen, I think, took more my interpretation and didn't think he could run wide. He was surprised to learn that Hamilton was running. And this is the problem. The rules were never clear and open to interpretation. If they didn't want cars running wide every lap, then why did they wait so long to issue warnings? If cars were allowed to run wide and gain the lap time advantage, then why is it different when you overtake off track? If you're still allowing cars to run off wide there. Going wide by yourself is still gaining an advantage because you're going faster, so overtaking in that same spot shouldn't be considered different in gaining an advantage. If you're allowed to run wide and not have track limits imposed, then that should also mean it's fine to overtake there too. Michael Massey insisted the rules stayed consistent throughout the race and didn't change. I would actually argue that the race director's notes contradict Article 27.3 of the sporting regulations, because the sporting regulations say stay on the track. The race director's notes said you can run wide. The sporting regulations should trump the race director's notes in terms of hierarchy of rules. So the question now is, does it matter if there is track limits or not? And the answer is no, it doesn't, provided that the track limit rules are clear and don't change. It doesn't matter, because if everyone is on the same playing field, then there is no advantage or disadvantage. But these rules changed multiple times, including mid-race, and weren't clear, and that's where the problem lies. IndyCar's first race at COTA didn't have track limits, and everyone ran ridiculously wide at turn 19. Their second race there, IndyCar said they would impose track limits at turn 19. And they put scoring lines at the beginning and exit of the turn that you had to trip. If you went off track, you didn't trip the scoring loop. And it went to race control to be reviewed if you had an incident, like you were forced off, or just blatantly ran wide. On road courses, NASCAR only used track limits in regard to chicanes. If all four tires leave the track and cross over the curb, a driver must stop at a designated spot on track to mitigate the advantage gained, or it's a pass-through penalty. These rules apply to any instance of a car leaving the track, even if the car is spun. It is to not leave interpretation for if an advantage was gained or not. Martin Truex Jr. was penalized for missing a chicane under caution in the 2021 Busch Clash at the Daytona Road Course. However, for corners that aren't a chicane, NASCAR allows drivers to run wide, if they choose, and it's pretty common practice for all drivers to run wide out of corners with extra asphalt on the exit, and no penalties are given for passing off track. To keep it simple, you can just say, keep it on the track between the white lines, and this leaves very little, if any, room for interpretation, as the sporting regulations say that just part of the car has to be in contact with the track. So the car can go over the line as long as it's still touching the line, it just can't completely cross over that line. So now, you've heard from me, and now I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on track limits for the Bahrain Grand Prix, and how they changed throughout the weekend? Should Hamilton have been allowed to run wide? Should Verstappen have been allowed to overtake off track? What should F1 do for track limits? Let me know what you think down in the comments. Thanks for watching, and until next time, so long everybody.